You're listening to Cards to the Moon, a podcast about trading cards from both a collector and investor perspective. We hope you'll stick around for the ride as we take a deep dive into the state of the hobby, share some hot takes, hopefully some useful advice, and fun stories along the way. Hey guys, welcome back to Cards to the Moon. This is episode 266, and my name is Clark from 5cardguys.com and 5cardguys on Instagram and on YouTube. I'm doing this intro solo today because for the rest of the pod, I'll be playing the joint pod that I did with Paul Hickey of the Sports Card Strategy Show. Yes, we're back together for 2025, and thank you to all those who have come over from Paul's show to also give us a listen here on Cards to the Moon. But before we play the joint pod, where we talk about being first to the market with graded cards after a new release, as well as a discussion on cracking and resubmitting to other grading companies, I wanted to start today's episode with the news of the Paul Skenes 1/1 MLB debut patch rookie auto finally being pulled. And I'm sure you heard already, it was pulled by an 11-year-old kid. So he's got a pretty big decision ahead. Does he auction it off? I know Golden's already asking for his business. Does he take the Pittsburgh Pirates offer, which includes 30 years of season tickets, plus a meet and greet with Paul Skenes himself? Or does he just hold on to it? Now, if I'm a betting man, he's probably going to go for option 1 to auction it off. I mean, I personally would probably maximize your buck that way, but we'll see, and we'll definitely report back once the kid decides. Now, if he does sell, how much do you think it'll go for? Just to refresh your memory, some of the more high-end MLB debut patch cards that already sold include Junior Caminero, who's the Tampa Bay Rays stud rookie, and that one for $66,000. The Jackson Chourio MLB debut patch, that sold for $105,000. I believe it was a PSA 9. And of course, there's the $150,000 bounty that was paid out to the person who pulled the Anthony Volpe MLB debut patch. Now, I know there are other big cards that were pulled, like the Jackson Holiday MLB debut patch, as well as the Jason Dominguez, which should go for a bunch of money. But Paul Skenes, I'm sure he will probably top them all. Let me know what you guys think it'll go for. I'll include the link to our newsletter chat group in the show notes, where I'm looking forward to seeing your guesses. All right, without further ado, here is the joint pod with Paul Hickey of the Sports Card Strategy Show. Enjoy.
Clark Kim, my main man from 5 Card Guys and Cards to the Moon. What's up? How you doing?
Pretty good. We're back for the new year, so I'm glad to be with you again, and looking forward to great things in 2025.
Absolutely, and welcome to the Sports Card Strategy Show, Cards to the Moon listeners. I'm Paul Hickey, and we are talking about 3 different topics on today's show that I'm really excited to ask Clark about. One is, I'm calling it first to the market, but it really has to do specifically with when new releases come out. Because on last week's show, we did an analysis on whether or not it makes sense to try to be first to the market with a PSA graded card, say a big card, maybe not a huge case hit, or maybe not like the biggest hit in a box, but a significant card out of a new release. Does it make sense to be first to the market with a PSA 10 or not? Is that too risky of a strategy? And we did an analysis on last week's show, but we've got some significant releases that have just come out. We've had, obviously, Bowman Draft 2024. We've had Prism Football. So, a lot of Jaden Daniels singles out there. Maybe people trying to grade his Prism Silver and be first to the market, that kind of thing. So, Clark, I wanted to ask you, what do you think of this strategy? Do you or your listeners or colleagues at Cards to the Moon and 5 Card Guys have experience with this? What do you think of this strategy? Really trying to be first to the market with a PSA 10 of a significant card out of a new release.
Yeah, I'm glad you said significant card, because during the hobby hype, during the 2021-22, pretty much that was the strategy. You grade everything as quickly as you can, and then all PSA 10s have a significant premium, and you just almost couldn't lose flipping. But now you have to choose your cards wisely. And that's why, even looking at 2024 Bowman Draft, we were talking in the last week's episode with Jack Caglione and Travis Bazana, who are the top two guys, arguably, in the set. And I'm already seeing PSA 10s on the market now, right? So if you kind of look at the cost comparison of what a raw is, that's still selling on eBay because it is a fairly new release still. You're almost looking at double the profits for PSA 10s. So just quick couple numbers. Travis Bazana, his base rookie auto from the 2024 Bowman Draft set, PSA 10 is going for about $400, and his raw card is going for about $180. So that's the premium you're looking at. And Jack Caglione is the same thing. PSA 10 going for $400, and his non-graded raw cards are going for $200. So you're saying, so it does work. And I think what's good about 2024 Bowman Draft to get significant cards graded now is that even if you get it back and you're listing it for $400, $450 right now, there is a potential that it'll go up even higher when we get closer to the MLB season, because there's always that initial hype of top prospects, top rookies. And I think that's probably, or more usually, the best time to sell your cards when people are really excited about these top prospects. So right now for 24 Bowman Draft, if you ripped and you got one of these top rookies, I think it's just good advice to get it graded, and especially if you think it'll PSA 10.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make about this Bowman Draft release every year. It's an interesting timing that it comes out in December. So you not only have like the hype of the new release trying to get first to the market with a PSA 10, but then you don't even really need to be first to the market if you get it graded by March. By the end of March, you can be like basically regular speed to the market and still make some money maybe on the baseball hype. So I like that. And I actually have experienced that personally with Wyatt Langford last year, just basically not doing anything super special, buying his base auto, first auto, and getting it graded. And I think I got maybe even a 9 on one of them and still did okay on a 9 just because it was a decent timing. And of course he made the club out of spring training, so that probably helped. And then you've got other releases, of course, that may not be the best timing on the calendar. Like I would say Prism Football is an interesting new release because now we have a situation where really, other than a few people left over in the playoffs, everyone's season is over. So you've got rookies like Bo Nix and Drake May and J.J. McCarthy who didn't even play. You've got obviously Jaden Daniels is the big one. He's going to be the one that everybody's after. Caleb Williams. One thing that you mentioned related to the raw to PSA 10 prices with 2024 Bowman Draft, I noticed that if you go to some bigger cards, now this isn't out of Prism, but out of Donruss, Caleb Williams' Downtown actually goes for slightly more in a PSA 9 than it does raw. So you've got the upside on that particular card. If you can get it for around $800 US raw, you've got the upside of close to $1,700 in a PSA 10, but it still goes for like just over $800 in a PSA 9. So you're going to lose a little bit, but in some cases, if it's a big enough card, it might be worth grading it, even if it does get a 9, because you've got the upside of a 10, and you really don't lose your shorts if you get a 9. I mean, it keeps you in the game if you can get a 9 and sell it right away. So the first to the market strategy from buying singles out of a new release, I think is interesting. Obviously, I think to your point with the good old days of 2020 or maybe even early 2021, you had the ability to rip wax and kind of get everything graded. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit different now. I want to, segue over into another great way to make money flipping sports cards. But again, there's no surefire bet because there's risk involved in the strategy that I'm about to bring up. And in the segment that we call Addicted to Crack on the Sports Card Strategy Show,
I like that.
we talk about our top crack and submit to PSA options. So for those of you out there, for Cards to the Moon listeners or Sports Card Strategy listeners, maybe new listeners out there, there is a significant pricing difference in gem mint cards that are not graded by PSA and gem mint cards that are graded by PSA.
Yeah.
There's a pricing difference on the secondary market, but not necessarily always a quality difference. And then if you were to take it a step further, I would say the further back you go into like vintage cards, you don't even need to be looking at gem mint. You can be looking at sometimes a BGS 6 and a PSA 6, or a BGS 6.5, a PSA 6.5, and a PSA 7. Of course, PSA doesn't have a 9.5 grade, but you do even have grading companies like SGC and CGC who have a 9.5 mint plus, they call it. So you could even try to find cards sometimes that are a 9.5 mint plus from a grading company and try to cross those over to PSA 10. Now, don't try to cross them over, but definitely crack them, make them raw again, and then you can submit them in a bulk submission to PSA. So, Clark, I want to talk to you about this because we haven't talked about this yet, and we've talked several times. We've created quite a bit of content together, and crack and submit. Is this something that you do? Is it something that you've had success with, or is something you're leery of? Break it down for us here.
Yeah, I know friends that have done it quite a bit and with great success. But like you were saying, it's no guarantee. You'll definitely lose on some of it, in terms of cracking and resubmitting, because it could come back a lower grade. And I personally don't have a lot of experience with it, but I do have one recent experience with it, and I could share that with you and my thought process in it. And that was my 2009 Bowman Chrome rookie auto of Mike Trout. So it was a big card, and I got it. Beckett. It was Beckett graded BGS 9 with the 10 auto. Okay, and I just bought on eBay. I didn't grade that myself, and it was one of those cards that I've always wanted ever since I got back into the hobby. And then Mike Trout unfortunately got injured again, and then his card started to plummet, and so did all of his even more higher end cards as well. And I was thinking maybe I can sell this and then reinvest it into a refractor number to 500 with whatever I can get out of it. It's because everything's kind of dropping down. But what I liked about my BGS 910 auto card was the subgrades. So if you're going to crack from BGS to PSA, Beckett graded cards have subgrades, and the subgrades will give you maybe a better indication of whether it could get a better grade. And what I mean by a better grade is not necessarily a PSA 10. That's kind of your best case scenario. But even a PSA 9, kind of like what you were saying, a BGS 9 to a PSA 9, you'll see a healthy bump in value if you could get that. And I was just looking over the subgrades of my BGS 9, and it was 9.5 on the centering and the corners. The edges were a 10, so I got 110. And why it was a BGS 9 was because the surface had an 8.5. And the surface could be, the reason for an 8.5 for a surface could be because there's a dimple or there's a slight scratch, and you kind of have to examine it yourself. And I didn't see any significant dimples, which are harder to get a better grade in if that was the case. But if there was a slight scratch, then maybe you can wipe it down, and you never know. So that's kind of the risk I took. And long story short, it came back at PSA 9. So I was pretty glad with that. That's at least a $1,000 bump in value.
Yes, nice, right? Good work.
So there you go. And I ended up selling it recently for that little extra bump in value. And now I'm looking for a nice Mike Trout refractor card I can reinvest in.
What a great success story. That's perfect, man. Thank you for sharing. And you dropped a lot of great knowledge in there too, a lot of value for the listeners in terms of looking at the BGS subgrades. I mean, a quick story or two from me on this. When I first started cracking and submitting to PSA, the mistakes, I made two key mistakes. One of them was I didn't really look at the card that was in the slab that I was buying as much as I needed to. Instead, I just looked at the grade. And so the point that you make about the BGS having subgrades, I was cracking a lot of SGC at first. And so I wasn't able to look at the subgrades. And I was looking at, oh, this is an SGC 10. And I was doing my research around the potential bump from like an SGC 10 to a PSA 10. And I thought that that was pretty safe. Okay, if it gemmed at SGC, it has a good chance of gemming at PSA. Unfortunately, a lot went wrong because again, I made two mistakes. One was I wasn't really examining the card that was in the slab. I wasn't looking at it like a grader would potentially look at it. I was just because obviously everybody we're cracking it out and submitting it raw. So nobody knows the person grading it doesn't know that it got a grade earlier. They're regrading it. And so I wasn't doing that very, very important part. And Clark talking about the subgrades really is a good point because if you are looking to crack and submit, I have had more success the more that I've done this with BGS because of the subgrades, because they at least give you some sort of indicator of why a card has gotten a certain grade. And so then when you examine that card, examine the subgrades, you can make a more informed decision as to what you think it might grade at PSA.
Yeah.
And PSA selling for more on the secondary market is why we keep saying we're submitting it to PSA in this case. The other big mistake I made was I wasn't looking at what the card would sell for if it didn't get the desired grade.
Right.
And so I would say in honestly 95% of cases, the grade or half grade down at PSA from what you're trying to achieve will slaughter you. We're not just talking break even. We're talking it could be $400, $500, $600 of a loss versus $200 to $1,000 of a win, right? Clark laid out a good scenario where he bumped up about 1K. Well, it's easy to look at the data and go, oh, well, I could bump up 1K if I get the desired grade here, or potentially even the likely grade. But what I would encourage everybody out there to do is do your research around what would you be out? What would you be looking at financially if you get 1 or 2 grades lower? Because I can tell you from experience, I've cracked and submitted for myself only, probably a couple hundred cards to PSA. And so and I would say the first half of those, I suffered pretty massive losses from the 2 mistakes that I just walked you guys through. And I've gotten better at it during the last half of the cards, and not only getting better with examining the cards, but getting better with, just buying the right cards and not putting myself in a situation where, there's a lot of upside, but now I'm susceptible to a huge loss if it doesn't get the grade I want. Now, one other interesting story real quick, I'll try to be brief on this, is I did buy a Michael Jordan BGS 9, a 1987 Fleer this past year. And I bought it for around $900 US. And if that crosses over to a PSA 9, there's a significant bump there. And when I was looking at the card, it had I think 1 10 subgrade, 2 9 subgrades, and an 8 subgrade. And the 8 or 2 9, I think there was at least basically what it spec'd out as was it spec'd out as a potential to even get a PSA 10, because I believe there was a 9.5 subgrade as well, a 9 and maybe an 8. So okay. I might be a little bit off on that. It definitely was a BGS 9, but there was a subgrade of an 8, and the subgrade of an 8 was on the surface. I couldn't tell anything about the surface.
Yeah.
I took it to a trusted resource who does this a lot in the hobby and actually has a business that everybody would probably know. I'm not going to throw out who it is. And he's a great guy, but he helped me with looking at it and going, yeah, Paul, there is nothing wrong with the surface here. This could cross over to a PSA 10, which would then have been like a 10x bump from the significant bump that I was hoping to get just to get to a PSA 9. Well, long story short, even though there was nothing wrong with the card, it came back and it came back as a PSA 8 first when I went through this hobbyist who does this for a living.
Yeah.
And so that is a significant bump down, right? And so then the person told me, look, it got an 8, but I'm going to resubmit it again because I really think this is a 9. So he cracked it out, resubmitted it to PSA. We were hoping for a 9. It came back as an 8 again. So now what do? Well, now thanks to this gentleman, he said, look, let's resubmit it to BGS in a Beckett raw card review, which for those of you who are unfamiliar, if you get whatever Beckett gives you in a raw card review, they honor that grade in a slab. So he submitted it to Beckett in a raw card review. It got a BGS 9 again, the exact same grade. Right. And he figured out that there was a surface issue, but it was a printing defect. So it wasn't anything that we could really see on the card, but it was a printing defect. Again, this is from 1987.
Right.
So he had to go back and do a lot of research. Long story short, gets a BGS 9. I end up selling it for about $100 profit after all of that. Even counting the resubmitting fees and everything like that. So, well, like that, all that is to say that if you do your research the right way around what your potential upside would be, and you buy the card, this is the other thing, Clark. Buy the card for the comps of that card. Don't buy the card for what you would hope. Like, don't factor in like some kind of profit margin and go, well, if I bump up a grade, I'm okay going and paying a little bit more for it.
Yeah.
Because I originally got a good deal on the BGS 9, I was able to still profit from it even after resubmitting it, technically cracking it 3 times and submitting it 3 times, the last one back to BGS. So this is something that people can make a lot of money on. We're going to talk on the Sports Card Strategy Show more about cards like Barry Sanders 1989 Score, Joe Montana 1981 Topps, Wayne Gretzky 1979 O-Pee-Chee, Tony Gwynn 1983 Topps, Ricky Henderson 1980 Topps, and again the Michael Jordan 1987 Fleer 59. So would love it if everybody comes over to check out one of our Sports Card Strategy Show episodes to find that analysis. But Clark, while we have you, release calendar strategies. This is something that we talk a lot about, and you and I have talked about this before. But one of our main strategies is that when a new release comes out and the entire hobby starts pouring their money into that wax, breaks, and singles from that new release, we like to typically go back a year or two and buy the top singles with upside from that same release, but from previous years.
Yeah.
So is this something that you and your colleagues over at 5 Card Guys and Cards to the Moon have done? And is it something that you have had success with? Talk about maybe this strategy and maybe there's, maybe there's success stories, but maybe there's also risks to this strategy that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, no, I personally love this strategy because I believe we even talked about it in a previous episode, but the stars of even yesteryear are long forgotten when all these new prospects and top rookies come up and they get the shine and everyone wants their cards. But I love looking back a year and there's usually good deals to be had. So even this past year, we got 2025 Top Series 1 coming out next week for baseball, and you see who the top rookies are, and then you almost forget, like, what was in 2024? Like, it was tough. Like, you have to almost remind yourself and go back to it, and or even 2023, like even a couple years out. Guys like, I like targeting guys like Corbin Carroll and Gunnar Henderson now. The guys that had all the attention last year. And in their second year, usually because they're Rookie of the Year candidates or Rookie of the Year winners, the second year is always an adjustment period for these guys. Other than Gunnar Henderson, who seemed to really do well in his second season, but still, his attention is not as much as it was when he first came out. And so I like looking at those card prices of different cards, whether it's Topps Heritage Red Ink autos for these guys that are numbered, or of course the first Bowman Chrome autograph cards as well. And then looking further back, like one guy I'm really excited about in targeting is Julio Rodriguez. So he's 2-3 years back, and he was a cover boy for pretty much all of the new baseball card releases a couple years ago, and everyone thinks he had a down year. We talked about this on Cards to the Moon, but if you look at his stats, he just started slow. He reminds us of another guy you might know. His name's Juan Soto. Just starts off slow, but at the end of the season, he just ramps up. And his stats, if you compare it from year to year, wasn't that significantly off. But there's this stigma that he's not the superstar that everyone thought he would be. But I think he'll have an even greater rebound season this year as he adjusts even more. And he's still a mid-20s, really young guy, and stays healthy. So J-Rod is one of those guys I love to target this year. And one guy that I was targeting last year because he had a a great season, but then because of other rookies coming up, he was maybe a little bit forgotten, was a guy named Bobby Witt Jr. And we know what happened with Bobby Witt this past year. I didn't take my own advice. I should have bought in last year. If I did, I would have been profiting hand over fist right now with Bobby Witt cards. But because right now it's just a little too late if you want to profit on him now. You got to hold him to probably mid to long term at this point because of his card prices are so inflated. But guys like that where they're a year or two out and maybe the shine's off a little bit on those guys, but you look at their numbers, they performed well during the rookie year and they still have that potential to take that next step. You can only find those guys in previous year sets, really. And that's where I love to take advantage of. So to your point, I love that strategy.
We're totally aligned. And for most of the hobby, that's hyperbole, but I feel like most of the hobby
right.
doesn't look at this strategy. I feel like most of the hobby gets so caught up in the new release and really has tunnel vision and FOMO on I've got to go get this adrenaline rush. And I guess on one hand, it can be considered a little boring to go after some of these other names, but really is making money and making profit boring? I would say no. And we've had a lot of people at nooffseason.com, I would say at least half of our premium members say, I found you guys after wasting so much money on breaks, trying to buy into breaks and buying and ripping wax. And I'm so glad I found you because while that's exciting, I'm so sick of wasting all that money. Yeah. And so a lot of times we'll come up with strategies for people to try to sort of break their quote unquote addiction to that. Right. And so everything that you just said is so perfect for people to go back and hit the rewind button on their podcast app and listen to what Clark said over and over again, because he's talking about young, exciting major leaguers that have already proven that they are legitimate major leaguers. Even more than that, they're the young stars of the game. So we get so caught up in these new prospects that get released every year. And the strategy that Clark just outlined in terms of going back, I love it. I love it. Your analysis of not only the players to go look at, but also you threw in some cards that make a lot of sense to go buy in terms of being able to buy them low and the cards have some upside built in. Great comparison to Juan Soto in terms of just kind of ramping up slow throughout the season. In terms of J-Rod, I love everything that you just said, and I'm excited for people to go make some of those baseball plays as well. I think there's a ton of basketball and football plays that we could be talking about. I think part of the problem with the basketball and football plays is that there's a little bit of fatigue around some of these guys because we're at the end of the football season, right, and we're kind of right in the middle of the NBA season. But we'll talk more about that in upcoming content on the Sports Card Strategy Show. But Clark, thanks again for creating content with me, man. I really appreciate it. Is there anything you wanna talk about before we let each other go?
No, I would love to carry the conversation on about cracking and ripping, because there's so much more we can touch upon that if I started another conversation, it would be another half hour. So I'm just saying that out loud, so we'll remember for the next time we meet.
Yeah, you will. You run point on the next one, and
Okay.
then the listeners will have much more to look forward to for Cards to the Moon and Sports Card Strategy Show.
Sounds good.
All right, my man. Be well. We'll talk to you again soon.
Hey, thanks for listening to Cards to the Moon. We'd really appreciate you subscribing to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also connect with each of us on Instagram at 5cardguys, or you can follow Hyung at Integrity Sports Cards, or John at TradeU at Recess. You can also check us out at 5cardguys.com. Thanks again, and hope to connect soon.